Bueno, és una mica repetitiu, però crec que és un missatge que des de Women in Aerospace es transmet molt, però crec que és molt necessari transmetre'l. I de tots els missatges superinteressants, crec que el més important és aquest, el que ha comentat l'Àurea, que és el sector espacial és una realitat oberta a tothom. Això vol dir que hi ha oportunitats i que simplement s'han de buscar. I el New Space és l'exemple més clar. Les sessions de la primera jornada han arribat a la fi. Ha estat una jornada, no sé vosaltres, jo he disfrutat moltíssim, he après moltíssim. Han sigut converses apassionants i jo personalment tinc una satisfacció en demostrar una vegada més el talent que tenim al nostre voltant. Haig de reconèixer sobretot que per mi és una satisfacció veure tantes dones que omplen aquesta llotja el dia d'avui. Ara una altra dona referent, la Mònica Roca, presidenta de la Cambra de Comerç de Barcelona, compartirà les conclusions de la jornada i farà una sessió de tancament. I a continuació, Antoni de Quim donarà peu a les sessions de networking que es faran a la tarda. Gràcies.
Si voleu challenge, això és un challenge, us haig de dir, perquè s'han dit tantíssimes coses que la veritat és que no sé si seré capaç de fer grans resums. M'hauria estat molt més fàcil, us haig de dir, resumir la sessió d'observació de la Terra, però crec que més que un resum, potser faig pinzellades de coses que m'han semblat interessants a remarcar. I no pretenc fer més que això, insisteixo. A la taula de funding, potser switch to English, maybe it's easier because everything has been in English and maybe I retain the words easily in this way. But I found interesting that they said, is it unique when you see a project or an idea? Is it the best I can find? So we should perhaps retain this if we want to start with a business. It's a question that we need to bear in mind. Sometimes this is more related to, or people think it's more related to research, because you want to really push it. But actually in industry, we also want to push and do the best we can, and this is how investors will find it interesting as well. One idea that I liked very much, and I think it's been repeated, is that the first, that the customer is the best way of funding a project. So when you are unique or the best, then you will find a customer that will pay for it. There's other things that have been said, like the 3D printing, which is perhaps we talked about the 3D printing, I think, a couple of years ago. And 3D is technology that is quite well understood and preserved here in Barcelona. So knowing that is interesting for space, that's something also interesting. It's a challenge because there is no gravity, and how do you make a 3D printer to work with no gravity? I'm sure that they have been studying this, and it's definitely the way that are intended to conquer the moon by printing where astronauts will stay in the moon, so bear this in mind. It's also interesting, the idea that moving from one technology to another, and from space to another technology, and from different technologies to space, this has also been commented, and I think automobile is definitely one where Catalonia is very well settled, and if we know that we can reuse some technology developed in this other sector, or this sector can actually use technology that has been developed in space, that's something also to bear in mind. One other interesting point is that there is no less venture capital in the EU, in Europe, than in the US. This has been clearly stated in one of the panels, and I think this is actually very good news. Venture capital moves around, so we can actually go and find venture capital anywhere, and no matter where the project is located, venture capital moves around. Then that's also been interesting, that the public money into private companies, this happens somewhere in Europe, but not in Switzerland, which I find an interesting. But here then we developed this idea of anchor tenants, which is the public sector buying the product to the private sector, which is again one best way to actually being the public sector, being the customer, is a good way of funding because it's actually a need. And I think this is very well linked to the Catalan strategy, actually, because this is what the Catalan government has done, is acting as a customer of the satellites that have been promoted within this strategy. I also found interesting what has been said about Google. Maybe we don't need to go into this, but I think it's interesting. USPA has put quite a lot of funding in promoting this sector, and there's been listed quite a large number of actions like hackathons, matchmaking event. And I want to put attention to this one, because one of my people that I know, I'm very much obsessed with this moving the knowledge from where it's created in the research centers or universities into the industry. And we look for ways of doing this, and there are many ways, and I think these matchmaking events are extremely useful, and they are simple. In fact, it's not very complicated. We don't reinvent any wheel, but they actually work. So I encourage this to continue funding these matching events, but also to everybody to join these events to get the match, the proper match. Data users. It's good to teach, if I may say, the users of what they can do with this data. And we've had a panel at the beginning of the day about Earth observation, and there's so many possibilities of using the data in Earth observation and things linked to Earth observation, perhaps not related to climate, but actually related to agriculture, to floods, to fires. And so there's so much we can do, but we need to teach, we need to make the users understand what the space data can do for them. And it's good sometimes not to even say that this data comes from space. It's just showing pictures and through platforms where the data can be easily visualized so that we can convince them of what this data can do for them. Again, Best Funder is a customer. Okay, there's something interesting. Space has normally a lot of public funding support, but actually I think that it's worth mentioning the new space is not intended to have so much public funding in a way. This is one of the, I think, key differences between the new space and the traditional space, because it's customer oriented, and therefore somebody will pay for it without so much funding from governments. Having said that, I'm not saying we don't want funding from the governments, particularly to seed it, but then, as we said at the beginning of the morning, we need this to roll from the private sector. We talked about how some of the government funding goes to big companies, and we don't always see these moving to the SMEs. But actually, EU obliged the big companies in a lot of the European projects. There is a minimum percentage of SMEs that have to join the project. So SMEs need to be aware of this and make sure that this filters or flows through the big companies towards the small companies, because that's what the Europe is actually requesting. I think administration needs to facilitate. This is something clear. It's not the only thing that need to do, but they need to facilitate, definitely. And then having an ecosystem, it's extremely important. That links actually to the last table. We've talked about how difficult, I mean, all through the day, how difficult it is to find engineers or people that have the capabilities to work on the space business. It's difficult, and yet we have a lot of talent that moves away from Catalonia towards Europe, which is great, but we say in Catalan, volta al món i torna al born. So we need a lot of engineers to work on our companies because there is so much to do. So it's good to have the ecosystem, all the parts of the ecosystem, from the universities and the research centers up to the companies or industry. I think the last table is extremely interesting to see all the different experiences, and gives us examples of things that work, that if you put all your effort, you make it, come through and reality. And we've seen examples that are extremely encouraging, in fact. But also having places like, or institutions, I don't know, I mean, like the ESA BIC, I don't know how to call it, but I think it's very, very, very important for those who want to start up a business, because the ESA BIC can help a lot, as they said, not only with the funding, which is not negligible, of course, it's interesting, but also with the incubation, having the ESA brand, that helps a lot. Also to find these customers that we said before, this funding, and through this community. So I can only thank you, all of you, from the speakers to the moderadors, to the chair people, for everybody listening. This has been, is being a great day, and I should thank you all very, very much for being here, for give the best of you, so that this can be a success. And I was going to invite you, but I think someone else is going to do that. Yeah, thank you.